If you are someone who seeks to understand, predict, and perhaps even influence the trajectory of modern politics, you have to have an understanding of a concept known as the post-war consensus.
You called out the problem of the post-World War II consensus, what we got wrong.
Western civilization is one thing before the two world wars and the Holocaust, and it's something quite different after.
All right, terms like the post-war consensus, these are terms that are getting thrown around a lot more now. And the reason why they're getting thrown around is because this is more or less what the Western civilization has operated under. This has been kind of the international order that has governed our behavior for about 80 years.
The post-war consensus is one way to describe the secular religion that Western morality is built upon. Every society is based on a framework that tells people what behaviors are good and what behaviors are bad. Those behaviors are then personified and represented in a culture's mythology. In Christianity, Jesus is the ultimate good and Satan is the ultimate evil. But in the secular West, we have a modified framework. We don't necessarily have a single person that represents the ultimate good, but we do have someone who represents the ultimate evil. A core aspect of our education in childhood is learning about World War II and the Holocaust and watching various movies about them. And almost every villain in popular media is either literally a Nazi or something approximating them. Coleman Hughes just made a video about Nick Fuentes where he referenced a Nazi-like character from Succession.
Podcast Nick will roll his eyes at the accusation that he's a Nazi. Like the character Mark Ravenhead from Succession, he'll make you seem ridiculous for even asking the question.
Have you ever read Mein Kampf? Yeah, a couple times, I guess. Couple of times? Are there Easter eggs in there you didn't get the first time? Look, I'm interested in that period of history, Tom, okay? I've skimmed it. Skimmed. Yeah. Thank you.
This cultural programming serves as a religious and moral system that unconsciously shapes our perceptions and ideas. If I showed a devout Muslim an offensive picture of the Prophet Muhammad, they would exhibit a negative physiological response before their mind can even fully process what they're seeing. And if I walked down the streets of New York City with a shaved head and a swastika armband, the people around me would exhibit the exact same kind of negative physiological response. Tom Holland, a Christian scholar who even hardcore atheists like Sam Harris respect, makes this point in his book, Dominion.
I'm a huge fan of your work. I'm working my way through Dominion, which is fantastic.
And one of the reasons I think why institutional Christianity fades in the wake of the Second World War is that, in a sense, fascism, Nazism gives us an alternative myth, but it's still a very Christian one. The fact that Hitler has replaced Satan and Auschwitz has replaced hell doesn't alter the fact that we understand Nazism to be the quintessence of evil for deeply, deeply Christian reasons.
The key thing to understand is that the post-war consensus is collapsing.
Why are we still so hung up on saying what is or isn't anti-Semitic? I take a position that I don't care.
This is largely due to a fundamental flaw that exists in all moral systems, something I call signal creep. Signal creep is when anything we regard as immoral gets tainted by whatever archetype of evil that moral system is anchored upon.
And what happens is that the things that are forbidden about the Nazis, they increase. At first, it's strict Nazi imagery, right? You can't bring that up. You can't show it. You can't identify with it. But then what happens is slowly everything that's related that can be stuck to it starts to be part of that story, right? So it's not just that people that, like, let's say, strictly identified with Nazism, that were in the party for the whole time and celebrated the chancellor and did all that. Those people, obviously, they're forbidden. But soon it's like, well, now Heidegger is forbidden. And then later it's like, well, actually anything that is trying to show that a nation, European nation, is great, or you can't have that because that's Nazism. Then all the imagery in the US that's from the South, because that's racism. Now it's not even about the Civil War. It's actually framed in World War II mythology. You can't have that. So Confederate flag, out. All that, out. Nationalism, out. Anything that celebrates European identity starts to get pushed out, okay? So it grows.
Let's examine this mechanic more closely. Nazism serves as the archetype of evil in the post-war consensus. When we have debates about the merits of nationalism, which is a concept that in principle can be separated from the historical reality of Nazism, we still use the Nazis' embrace of nationalism as a mark against it. The same thing happens for things like family values. which is even further removed from Nazism, but will still be associated with it as a means of criticizing it. And eventually, things as far removed as working out can be considered right-wing because of its proximity to fascism.
Did lifting weights turn you into a fascist?
Yes.
Why has there been so many media stories about exercise turning people right-wing?
For sure, the question of like, is lifting right-wing is something that I have thought about a lot because I've seen people having these conversations.
You can see this same process with a different variation of secular morality, in which left-wing communism serves as the archetype of evil over Nazism. Redistributive wealth policies, which were, at least in principle, central to communism, are attacked as communist evil ideas, and eventually any level of state regulation gets compared to communism due to it being the standard of evil in the minds of many.
They're making it laws where you can't drink when you want to, you have to wear a seatbelt when you're driving, and pretty soon we're going to be a communist country.
Signal creep is a problem because it prevents us from having nuanced discussions about very complex moral issues. Instead of evaluating the merits of nationalism or a wealth tax on their face, thought-terminating accusations of Nazism or communism are used to silence discussion around the issues. It's not difficult to come up with reasonable arguments against a highly nationalist state, and it's certainly not difficult to come up with arguments against a wealth tax, but signal creep actually prevents one from being able to make those arguments because it sounds like you're giving either idea a platform, which then actually puts you in the camp of being a suspected Nazi or communist for even willing to engage with an idea.
Jubilee is becoming increasingly irresponsible with their platform, and are secretly sidestepping their original goals as a company by moving ever closer to and making concessions with the far right.
Now, there are two ways to resist signal creep. The first is by clearly demonstrating the distance between an idea and the archetype of evil. This is very easy to do when people claim working out is fascist or drunk driving laws are communist. However, this is much more difficult when it comes to other issues. For example, central to Nazi ideology was a hatred of the Jewish religion. While the Nazis also viewed Christianity as problematic, it's not nearly as core to their ideology. This is why in the moral framework of the post-war consensus, calling Christianity a parasitic mind virus, as many atheists do, is perfectly acceptable. But if you say the same thing about Judaism, it is considered more morally repugnant solely due to the fact that it is conceptually closer to the archetype of evil in the post-war consensus framework. This brings us to the second way to resist signal creep, which is outright rejecting the framework to begin with. If someone believes in the Marxist critiques of capitalism, it's an inescapable fact that they will overlap with communist ideology to some degree, and not in just an incidental way, but in a way that is materially significant. Instead of spending time arguing whether or not Marxism is or is not a central aspect of communism, one can simply reject the notion that its proximity to communism matters at all. This requires the undermining of the entire moral framework, and this is in part done by normalizing communist symbolism and ideology in the broader culture. The dangers of this are obvious. While reducing the status of communism as the archetype of evil allows us to more freely engage with Marxist ideas and better separate the wheat from the chaff, it also opens the door to the very reemergence of the excesses of communist ideology that earned it its archetype of evil status to begin with. This is precisely what is happening with Nazism and the collapse of the post-war consensus. Kanye West making a song praising Hitler is an example of a direct assault on the status of Nazism as the archetype of evil, and the normalization of pro-Hitler memes and TikTok edits further contributes to the rejection of the post-war consensus. But perhaps most practically, the reason that the post-war consensus is falling apart is simply a function of temporal distance between our current understanding of morality and the original historical event that happened now almost 100 years ago.
The problem, too, is that story, like this story, will run out. There's no way that it can maintain forever. Like, you can't have the Nazis be the bad guys for 1,000 years. I mean, Alexander the Great was a horrible man. Alexander the Great slaughtered entire cities just because they didn't want to completely, they didn't surrender immediately, and just salted the earth and killed everyone, all the men, all the women, all the children. But we remember him with a more subtlety.
It's possible to see, but we don't want that happening with Hitler.
The thing is that I know this sounds like the weirdest thing to say in the world, but it is going to happen. Like, it's going to happen. Maybe it'll happen over 500 years. Maybe it'll take...
That Hitler will become a sort of heroic figure.
He won't necessarily be, I don't know if he'll be a heroic figure, but he will be a more subtle figure. Like, he'll just have a more subtle place in the history. He won't just be the incarnation of all that is evil in humanity, even though he did obviously horrendous, horrible things. And that's just going to happen. I know it sounds weird. People don't, it's going to happen because of time. It's going to happen because the stakes are going to go away, and the things that that held the world together are going to start to dissolve, and another story is going to appear, and another devil is going to come, and that devil will replace that one. And so it's just inevitable that it happens. The question is, you can say that when the end of World War II founded the modern world as a kind of mythological substructure, it had an expiration date. We don't know what the expiration date is, but in some ways it just had it.
As the post-war consensus collapses, it does free up our ability to discuss things like the virtues of nationalism or the negative aspects of a religion like Judaism. But at the same time, it's undeniable that the collapse of this secular religion also runs the risk of allowing genuine right-wing extremism to reemerge. One of the things that Friedrich Nietzsche famously predicted was that as secular Europe rejected Christianity, violence and destruction would emerge in the effort to create new moral frameworks. And now, as the religion of the post-war consensus collapses around us, we also run the risk of a repeat of the civilizational destruction we saw in the 20th century. There's much more to say on this topic, but until then, good luck and Godspeed.